Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 37. Foreign Parts. Martin stood above the bows of the ferry. He was looking out over the choppy English Channel. The white cliffs of Dover were coming nearer. There were no bluebirds. Martin couldn't help thinking of that dreadful song that his mum had always said she hated. A gig in the UK should have been something to look forward to. Martin wasn't so sure. It had all started to go wrong when they got to Calais. UK immigration had set up camp there now. Frankie and the band got out of the bus and walked towards the immigration control office. They were herded in by a pair of uniformed private security, evidently outsourced for the donkey work. The band did indeed feel like donkeys. Martin thought they'd make good extras as guards in a prisoner of war film. He resisted saluting and got in line. The real problems started when Tina stepped up to the plate. She had changed her name by deed poll from Bettina to Tina. Her US passport still had Bettina on it. The Jobsworth behind the counter insisted she'd have to get a temporary passport with her new name from the US consulate. The only one was in Paris. It took almost 20 minutes of pleading and persuasion on Richie's part for them to allow Tina into the UK. Martin was acutely embarrassed. He wasn't the only one in the party who had the sneaking suspicion that had she been white, this wouldn't have happened. Detlef, the driver, steered the double-decker bus meticulously up the ferry's exit ramp and out of the Dover terminal. He manoeuvred it skillfully around the series of roundabouts before the motorway. Martin was reminded of his very first time driving back to the UK. He dozed off as the Garden of England's Kent Hills swept by. He woke up to see the far blander, semi-detached suburban landscape as they neared Croydon. The band had rooms at the Hilton. It had a luxurious ring to it, but reality was to prove otherwise. His room wasn't ready, so Martin waited in reception and drank dreadful coffee. After finally collecting his key, he went up to his room. It had a nice view of the car park. The first thing was that there were no towels, not one. He phoned down, the lady apologised. 10 minutes later, Martin had enough towels to last a week. Then he checked the bathroom. He noticed that in places the silicone seal around the top of the bath was black with mould. Martin phoned down and asked for another room. The receptionist said they didn't have any. She'd send the duty manager up. A pimply school leaver in a suit arrived. He tried to convince Martin that it was merely discoloration, not mould. Martin sent him packing with a flea in his ear. He ran himself a mouldy bath. The venue looked like something between a disco and a nasty chicken-in-a-basket joint. Nothing remained of the grandeur of the former Palais de Danse, or of the rebellious reggae all-nighters made legendary by the Clash. Martin couldn't believe what a letdown this place was. The dressing room had a large but very dirty fridge and a couple of worn-out sofas. The grubby PVC ceiling tiles were hanging down in places, threatening to fall on some innocent passer-by. The back door suddenly flew open, and a group of mostly black performers and their entourage filed in obediently. A security official followed behind them, barking commands. The security team frisked them all, one by one, right in front of Martin. They shoved them around, but demanded rudely that they keep still. Martin was incensed. "Hey! You can't treat people like that. Have some respect, for fuck's sake." The female security chief barked gruffly back into Martin's face from close up. "This is my fucking venue. I'll do what I fucking like, so shut the fuck up." The line of artists were all still as church mice. Not a word. This reeked of arrogance and ignorance. Dinner smelt better. Out in the corridor, 3 large, jolly Jamaican ladies had been cooking up plantains, saltfish and jerk chicken. They'd set up with no ventilation, creating a fragrant Caribbean smog. Martin got himself a large portion of hot and spicy home cooking with collard greens. The MC announced Frankie and the band around 9 p.m. Martin stood on stage, uncertain what the English crowd would make of them. He was very rarely nervous these days. A couple of dozen near the front cheered loudly and jubilantly when Frankie came on. The rest just stood and looked unimpressed at first. The freeloaders were old-school roots reggae, not really in tune with what was considered happening at that time in London. The crowd warmed to the band by the end of their short set. Frankie could have done an encore. The MC snatched the mic away at the end of the last song. He'd been pointing at his watch impatiently from the side of the stage for 10 minutes already. Martin stood at the bottom of the steps down from the stage, cooling off. He swigged at a bottle of water. The guy who'd burst into the dressing room just before the show was hassling Frankie again. He wanted to book the band. He was a big, powerfully built black man dressed in designer casual wear. He had a gangster gold chain around his neck and a very expensive-looking watch. He was getting in Frankie's face. "You gimme some dates. You're gonna play for me, right?" "I don't do bookings. You have to talk to the record company. Richie'll give you the number." "You want to diss me on my territory, you pussy-all? You come back here, you'll be sorry." He pointed his finger at Frankie's temple, like a revolver. It was time to go. Up in the dressing room, Richie told everyone to stay close and get their things. We're leaving. The security man mountain led the way. Richie, Frankie, the ladies and the band walked down the stairs, through the crowd and out to the front entrance. Martin had never been so glad to see the bus. Once they were all inside, Richie pressed the magic button and the door hissed closed. Richie gave the command. "Okay, Detlef, Abfahrt." Detlef checked his mirrors and turned the key. The dashboard lit up and the powerful diesel engine rumbled into motion. The bus shuddered briefly in response. He pulled out into the traffic and they began their journey south, back to the coast. The air conditioning kicked in. Someone put on some music. Martin walked back down the gangway to the fridge and opened it. "Jemand auch ein Bier?" Several voices said yes. Martin grabbed as many as he could carry and walked carefully back down to his table. Eager hands reached out to relieve him of his load. Never had the tish of a beer bottle being opened sounded so satisfying. Martin got out his tobacco and rolled a joint. The streets of London went by in a blur of traffic and takeaways. Next stop was Marseille, a good 1,000 miles south. Martin could already smell the bouillabaisse. Martin wondered if the drivers here all had some kind of death wish, like taxi drivers in Paris, but this was several levels more dangerous. Red lights didn't seem to signify that much. Slow down a bit, then drive on. No one seemed to worry about which side they overtook. It was a mix of wacky races and the start of a Formula One race. Dust and fumes rose in the hazy sun. Expensive, shiny new European limousines, tired, overloaded trucks, bulging passenger buses, battered old saloon cars and whiny, smoky mopeds roared past the shuttle minibus. Welcome to Casablanca. Martin was in Morocco with Frankie and the band for 2 gigs. A civilised civic do with around 5,000 people, and a free-for-all where around 30,000 locals were expected. The hotel was all you might expect and more, cool and inviting after the heat and dust outside. It seemed almost dark out of the glaring sunlight. The lobby was cosily furnished with luxurious armchairs and sofas around teak coffee tables. The dining room walls were cladded with dark-stained mahogany. An enormous red-lacquered wooden capella was suspended high over the tables. Antique candelabra graced the dining tables. Martin set off to explore with Anna, Mac, Andy and Pip. Mac led the expedition in brusque East German dialect, street map at the ready. The party made its way to the magnificent Hassan II Mosque near the harbour. It towered against the blue sky, with finely crafted marble walls and imposing minaret. Simply breathtaking, but everyone was dying for a cold drink and some shade. Rick's Cafe was about 15 minutes' walk away. It was in a converted 1930s mansion, with heavy wooden entrance doors flanked by chunky palm trees. The inner courtyard was surrounded by white stonework arches, with carved wooden balustrades around the balcony. The waiters and barman wore the traditional tasselled red Moroccan fez, white shirt and black tie. Martin and his companions were transported back into the 1940s as they sat at the bar enjoying delicious Moroccan coffee and ice-cold water. The enormous crowd at the open-air gig out in the suburbs stretched as far as the eye could see. It reminded Martin of that day in the park and all those people on the mountain. It was dusk and getting hard to see with all the dust from so many feet. When the freeloaders started playing, the waste ground between the housing estates was chock full of local families and their kids. Most of them were there out of curiosity. They didn't stay long. The crowd thinned out to about 5,000 young Moroccans out to have a good time. They cheered, sang and danced for many times their number. Martin soaked it all up. It wasn't every weekend you played 2 gigs in Africa.